Hey there, this is Seth Schaefer from Team Bots and Stuff Robotics, and today I'm going to give you guys a recap of Retrograde's most recent fight against Defender. Spoilers ahead for our fight with Defender and our fight with Huge. You can watch the fight right now on YouTube. I'll leave a link in the description below. If you watched our last fight recap about the Huge fight, you'll know that we took some huge hits and suffered serious damage to almost the entire frame. As I said before, the thing that upset me most about the Huge fight was that it took place the same day as this Defender fight. That happened because of static electricity. Allow me to explain. Sawblaze and Endgame were supposed to fight towards the end of the filming schedule on August 27th, the day before our Defender fight, and the same day we were slated to fight Huge as the last fight of the night. However, when Sawblaze loaded into the box, its ARM motor controller was broken. It had just been sitting in the battery tent for hours since it was tested and working before rolling into the arena. This was almost certainly due to the awful static electricity conditions in the area where Sawblaze had been sitting, and in no way the fault of Jameson Go or his team. The static problem has been brought up by many teams, and it plagued everyone for the entire event. Bloodsport even had a weapon ESC erupt into flames in the robot when tuning a motor in the battery tent because of it. I spoke with an electrical engineer on a different team who has 9 years of professional experience, and he said the situation was, quote, "the worst I have ever experienced anywhere." He also said that his team spent $500 and most of their effort through 2 days just to try and mitigate the risk of static ruining their electronics. He also said, quote, "the ESD situation was unacceptably horrifying." In any case, there was no way they were letting us fight before the main event. Sawblaze got back together and ready to load in, but that delay in production caused our fight with Huge to get pushed to the next day, the same day we had this fight against Defender. So, after Huge totaled our robot, it was about 1 PM when we started on repairs. We had to get ready as soon as physically possible to be guaranteed our fight against Defender. If we missed our time slot for this fight, we would almost certainly not get a third Fight Night fight at all, especially since we were a relatively new and unknown rookie team. I have a photo from that night showing Retrograde weighing in at exactly 250 pounds before our Defender fight at 6:58 PM. The whole team was working frantically for that 6-hour period to transfer all of our electronics from the Huge frame back into the frame that we fought Rampaged with in our very first fight. Replace the dead lifter speed controller, replace the ripped out drive motors, grind and paint more front forks, swap in a new set of rear wheels. The repairs were extensive to say the least. We did our pre-fight test box check-in at 7:02 PM. The drive worked. The arm worked. The undercutter, nothing. The production staff had been hounding us all day, asking when we'd be ready and threatening us that we might not get to fight if we weren't ready as soon as possible. We were told we had 15 minutes. We rushed to get the bot back into the battery tent, got the top plate off as fast as possible, and tried to figure out what could possibly be wrong. The dual undercutter motors were untouched from working when we fought Rampage, the 2 speed controllers as well. But when we stopped the electronics between the 2 frames, we had to unplug the motor phase and sensor cables from them, and when we put the electronics back, we plugged them back in. There were phase wires from motor A labeled A, sensor wires from motor A labeled A, going to an ESC labeled A. Same for side B. The battery connections were good, the radio was communicating with the controllers, we didn't have time to plug my laptop into the speed controllers to check for error messages. So Justin, our engineer on the electrical side, decided that we might want to try unplugging one of the weapon motors in case the 2 were set to be the wrong direction, were fighting each other. We had no idea that this would work, and we had no time to go into the test box to test it before the fight. We just realized that we probably had no main weapon in this fight, got the bot back together, and rushed to the arena for the fight. Alright, here is Aaron Lucas, who will tell us about his strategy before the fight.
Yeah, so going in, we knew that the undercutter most likely was not going to turn on. That last minute Hail Mary by Justin unplugging one of the motors meant that there was some small chance that if the 2 motors had been fighting each other, that we would be able to spin up with just one motor. So we wanted to check that first. So the strategy in the first few seconds was to try to avoid a box rush and see if the weapon had any signs of life, and then that would determine whether we were going to go lifter first or undercutter first. Obviously, if the undercutter was working in this fight, the strategy would be undercutter the entire time. Defender really didn't have a good counter for the undercutter, so we were set up really well to do some serious damage to their forks and their frame and potentially their wheels. Unfortunately, the undercutter didn't end up working, so the strategy at that point became control and aggression and maybe get a flip. We had a couple good opportunities to get a flip, just mistimed it. Driving practice is super important, and we didn't get a chance to drive the robot as much as we would have liked before this fight, or before the event, really. So the Rampage fight and the Huge fight combined made up all of the time I had practicing with this robot. So probably less than 2 minutes of stick time total. Jeez. And yeah, which is not very much.
No.
And you kind of need to, I have a lot of experience driving robots of all different sizes and shapes and types, and it wasn't so much I needed more driving practice. I just needed time to learn the dynamics of the robot. Every robot has slightly different driving dynamics. The center of gravity, center of mass is a really big one, because that determines your center of rotation. So with Retrograde, the weight distribution is biased really towards the back because of the undercutter. So the turning radius was weird and hard to get used to in such a short amount of time, because it really swings. It's really long because of the forks and the lifter, but the turning center of rotation is really far back. So it has a really big swing when you do turns. And you could see that kind of thing happening in this Defender fight, where I wasn't really comfortable with how the robot was turning. I wasn't sure what arc to take and how much power to give it to get it to turn the amount that I wanted. And Defender did a great job of taking advantage of that and getting around to our side and controlling us. They were more in control than we were, although towards the end of the fight we were able to show a bit of control.
Yeah, definitely. It was really unfortunate that we started smoking at the end. I don't think that really changed how the judges saw the fight necessarily, but yeah, it kind of sucks that we just found our motors were like this close to going the full 3 minutes, but just couldn't quite handle that push at the end where we're like stalling them practically, going like head to head against Defender.
Yeah, in those head to head pushing battles, it's always kind of a balance of how much throttle do you give to try to overcome either the grip or the stall torque of their drive base. And Defender had a very similar drive setup to us. They were using the same number of motors, same type of motors, 4 mag motors, small mags, similar gear ratio, probably geared up to about 15 miles per hour top speed. We had 4 wheels and they had 2, but their wheels had more grip than ours. So in a head-to-head pushing match like that, where both drive bases are basically equal, it's not like one robot is going to just overpower the other. And so you want to give it the minimum amount of throttle that you can get away with, just to maybe it only takes a little bit of throttle to engage the windings in the motor and basically create a lot of resistance to make it difficult to push you. So if you can just give it a little throttle and let them burn out their drive base, then you take that opportunity once their drive is dead to send it full throttle and maybe overpower them. But our motors gave out first. You could see that with the smoke.
Yeah. Yeah, we couldn't use the flamethrower in this fight because, as I showed in a picture earlier, we were right at the 250 line without it. So there was no way. I'm showing right now the video of the inside of that motor, and it's not pretty.
Yeah, the last
gearbox looks kind of fine for the most, or the new gearbox looks like really nice and clean, and then yeah, oof. Yeah, that is unfortunate. So with the lifter, you did at the start like very nearly flip them once, and then we saw the lifter move with no load on it a couple times after that. During the fight, did you notice that it like wasn't responding anymore, or like do you think there was some collision that might have caused that, or was it just like the arms moving fine and then all of a sudden no?
Yeah, I got under them and almost flipped them a couple times. And then I think it was maybe the third time we tried flipping, we like really locked forks with them. And I'm not sure if maybe our fork was kind of entangled in part of their robot and was basically holding the arm, basically locking the arm in a down position. But that was at the point where the lifter stopped responding. But I think after that match was when we discovered this issue with the lifter gearbox, when we took it apart in the pits, where that the little sun gear on the first stage of the planetary gearbox was just press fit, and so that press fit was slipping under the high torque demand. And that was, I think, the first time we had really pushed the lifter that hard. Rampage, we got a clean lift, was able to tip their robot over one edge. So we were only lifting part of the weight of their robot. And yeah, that the torque requirement was just too high for what we were putting through the gearbox.
Yeah.
The only way we could have figured that out before this fight was to, try to lift a full 250 pounds in the forks, max, peak torque required.
And the Battlebots did not provide a test weight for that. We did ask some team if they were willing to volunteer to let us mess with their bot at one point. I forgot which team it was, but eventually, like after this fight, we were just like playing around with one of the spare Bloodsport frames, which is only 72 pounds, so not even close to the 250 pounds that we would have really needed to see this.
Right. Yeah. The only object they have in the test box to play with is the big rubber tire, which I'm not sure how much
less
that
than
weighs,
80 pounds.
Yeah.
What was probably like the number one takeaway that you learned from this fight?
I think what lost us this fight was not anything that happened during the fight. It was the 6-hour period between getting totaled by Huge and the time we had to get back in the box.
Yeah, definitely.
That was like a big lesson in designing the robot to be repairable in a short amount of time, which is something we knew going into it and tried to design into it, but until you're put in that situation, and not just the robot design, but all the processes that you have in place as a team, like pit management, tool management, keeping things organized, knowing where everything is, labeling things, and that labeling labeling the electronics is what killed us there, and was the reason the undercutter didn't work, which in my opinion was the deciding factor in that fight. I think if the undercutter had been spinning from the beginning, it would have been a much different outcome.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, basically it seemed that when we were preparing for Huge, we unplugged the phase wires and speed controller and sensor wires from each motor from the two speed controllers. We have two motors, two speed controllers. Each motor has phase wires and sensor wires, right? And they were labeled after they were unplugged, which I didn't know. So I was the one who plugged them back in, but I plugged everything A to A to A, B to B to B. It turned out the phase wires were supposed to go A to B and B to A because they had been mislabeled. And that was just something that was done because, you know, we had no time to check it over. So if we had been given an hour instead of 15 minutes, it would have maybe taken half an hour to an hour at most for us to like thoroughly inspect the bot and get the undercutter working, since it was literally just a matter of swapping two cables from one side of the bot to the other.
Yeah, it would have been a less than 5-minute fix once we had the top plate off if we knew what the problem was. And when we went back to the battery tent and checked, we did check that everything was plugged in correctly, and according to the labels, everything was plugged in correctly. So there's no way for us to have even diagnosed that issue without running some further tests. But yeah, definitely very frustrating that was what caused the weapon to stop working.
Yeah. We just submitted our application for Season 7 also. I think everyone on the Retrograde team is really excited about what we have in store for next season if we get accepted too. What would you say is like 3 of the biggest improvements that we'll have for Retrograde 2 that you are willing to share before we do a whole reveal?
Simplified frame construction. So making repairs was not as easy as it should have been because of we had these different frame elements that were kind of slotted into each other, and when everything was perfectly aligned, and like the first time we assembled it, you know, everything goes together easily, but as soon as things start getting bent a little bit and tweaked and marred up, like surfaces getting marred up, little dings in them, and just like you're packing all those wires in there, and now things are under compression and kind of pushing on the frame elements. That meant that those nicely machined slots became very difficult to actually assemble. You know, like the frame elements would just not go together, and it was binding in different places. So it was kind of like a 2 or 3 person operation to kind of like go around with the rubber mallet and tap things into place until it was all perfectly aligned, and then we could, you know, put all the hardware in and get the frame together. So that was a big one. That was a big time waster because it's not like super productive work that's adding value to the robot. It's just like trying to get the robot, you know, together. Wiring obviously was a big one. Just like cable management, and you know, we got 2 weapon types and a flamethrower, so we were packing a lot of stuff into a tight space. And then yeah, the last big takeaway, I would say, is standardized hardware. You know, Bloodsport uses metric hardware, and we share a lot of sub-assemblies, like the drive motors and weapon motors are the same between Bloodsport and Retrograde. So we wanted to share as much hardware as we could between the 2 robots. So like all of our base hardware was metric, but then, in the last 2 weeks before the event, we were doing a lot of McMaster orders, and certain hardware only comes in certain lengths in Imperial, and we ended up with kind of this mishmash of Imperial and metric hardware of similar sizes, and hex head, socket head, and Torx. So there's 3 different types of tool and 2 different standards of hardware. So we ended up needing like a ridiculous amount of tools just to do basic maintenance and get the top plates on and off. And if we didn't have any single one of those tools, it was impossible to get the top plate off. And there were several times where it's like, where's the 5/16 hex driver? I don't know. And like you're running back and forth between the battery tent and the pit area looking for tools. And so like there's just a lot of inefficiency in that. But I think that comes along with being a rookie team. Obviously some of our team members had experience on Bloodsport prior to this, but operating a brand new robot, I think it just comes with the territory.
Yeah, that definitely was a pain point for sure, especially when it comes to the hex bolts. I think that like a Bloodsport approach of trying to just use as many like socket heads as possible, or even just switching to Torx where it's the same for Imperial and metric, would definitely help a lot for next year doing that. There's a lot of different optimizations that like you don't really think about until you have to deal with them in the real world that can make a pretty huge difference once you're actually at the event.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the kind of stuff that you don't really you think about, but it's not as obvious as like your weapon type. Like I don't know, you'd think that being a vertical spinner wins you matches, but like even if you're a vertical spinner and you can't get your robot ready in time and you don't have a weapon, you're not winning the match.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I don't think this was like a robot failure. In this case, it was like a preparation process kind of breakdown. And I think that like having that pressure applied to you makes you do better. Like now we know. And I think next year we will go into it with processes already in place to handle all of these things that we encountered and didn't expect.
Yeah, definitely. I guess what would you want the main takeaway for the audience to be?
Yeah, I don't think that Retrograde version 1 reached its full potential in the fight night rounds. Maybe there'll be more fights in the future that better demonstrate what the robot's capable of.
Maybe. Who knows?
And I think the architecture of the robot and the strategy with the lifter and the undercutter has a lot of potential. And I'm excited for everyone to see what we've come up with for version 2. And I think the design has the potential to be very competitive with the current field and the current meta. So I don't want people to give up on Retrograde based on the first few fights.